Good evening, friends. Today we have a program, a conversation with the author, book written by Shri Kundan Singh on the subject Colonial Discourse and the Suffering of Indian American Children. A Francophone post-colonial analysis written by Kundan Singh is here. I request him to be on the dais. Have Kundan Singh. Have it. Come. To converse with him, Shri Shivakumar, I request him to occupy the seat. I welcome you all to this rainy evening. For this, of course, the people would have come just because it's raining. We are very few people, but still the program is going on live. So people may be viewing our YouTube. So anyhow, we will start the meeting. On behalf of Indian Institute of World Culture, I welcome Dr. Kundan Singh and also Shivakumar to this evening function. Few words about Shri Kundan Singh, Dr. Kundan Singh. He holds a doctorate in humanities with a concentration in East-West psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies, San Francisco, California. Earlier, he obtained an MA in applied psychology with a concentration in social psychology from the University of Delhi, India. He is a professor at Sofia University since 2009, a scholar practitioner of integral yoga and the darshan of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. He has taught in the areas of integral philosophy and psychology, contemporary and traditional Vedanta, Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism, postmodern philosophy, philosophy of science and epistemology, critical thought and deconstruction, post-colonial studies and psychology, cultural and cross-cultural psychology, Indian psychology, yogic psychology, and transpersonal psychology, among a few others. He is a senior fellow with Hindupedia, where he is diligently involved with changing the representation of Hinduism and India in grade school textbooks in California and across the United States. He has also co-authored a book with Krishna Maheshwari titled Making Children Hindu-Phobic, a critical review of McGraw-Hill's World History Textbook 2018, and written other work titles The Evolution of Integral Yoga, Sri Aurobindo, Sri Ramakrishna, and Swami Vivekananda in 2008. He has also published several papers and book chapters on psychology, science, relativism, Indian psychology, and postmodernism. Dr. Kundan Singh is also the president of the Cultural Integration Fellowship, an institution in San Francisco inspired by the teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. He has also taught as a visiting faculty and adjunct faculty at the Graduate Theological Union and the California Institute of Integral Studies. Once again, I welcome Dr. Kundan Singh to this evening talk. With him conversing, Shri G.V. Shivakumar is conversing with him. Shri G.V. Shivakumar is Director, INDICA, Guru Sadhaka Sachiva. His responsibilities focus on INDICA's critical mission to cultivate leadership. He guides initiatives to serve gurus, perpetuate their legacies, enable or empower leaders committed to IKS to become influential thinkers, institution builders, and public leaders, and bolster the broader IKS ecosystem. Over the next 36 months, Shivakumar embarks on an ambitious pledge to honor and sustain the legacies of 108 living and past gurus from the 20th century. His efforts will focus on organizing, making accessible, and cultivating a parampara that highlights their significant contributions to our civilization. As an IKS research scholar, Shivakumar remains dedicated to his scholarly pursuits in Itihasa, Puranas, and Indian knowledge systems. His work includes developing contemporary frameworks based on IKS principles, with a special focus on the Mahabharata and Purushartha. He has been a prolific contributor to INDICA today, sharing his insights and knowledge with both academic and general audiences. He has delivered several storytelling and courses on Mahabharata, Purushartha, Indic civilization studies for aspiring leaders and students. He is a curator of Arya, an anthology of Vedic studies, a collection of 10 stories on 10 Vedic women by 10 authors published by INDICA. Shivakumar holds an MTech in Computer Science from IIT Bombay, a BE from a National Institute of Technology, Surat. With 25 years of experience in the IT industry, his expertise spans theoretical computer science, algorithms, and learning system design. Shivakumar resides in Bangalore and with his family and is a devoted follower of the river goddess Saraswati. On behalf of Indian Institute of World Culture and also on behalf of all of us present here, once again I welcome Shri G.V. Shivakumar. The subject itself is suffering of Indian American children. Not only American children, our children are also suffering with the same decolonization. I think Kundan Singh will explain how the American students are behaving or acting on our colonial mindset. And Shivakumar definitely will be taking out whatever best from the Kundan Singh book. I leave it to afterwards. I think they can ask some questions, sir, Kundan? Yeah. Audience can ask a few questions to him. I will leave it to Shivakumar to converse him.
Namaste. So I'm audible. Thank you very much, sir. Pranams for that elaborate introduction. Namaste once again, Kundanji. We'll keep the conversation a little, light and easy and free going. See, since the last 3 days, we've been with each other. We just concluded a deep dive into his book with 12 people for 2 days. So thankfully, because of that, everything is at the surface. And there are so many more questions that I myself have in mind after reading the book and then discussing with him for 2 days, and then along with so many people. So as they say, Kundanji, if you look at all the 18 Mahapuranas, the first section is a Srishti section. It establishes the Bhumika on which the rest of the Purana and its worldview is, elaborated. Like that, we will discuss the, Vyutpatti behind this book and then jump into the book, and then we'll zoom out once again from the book. At what point in time in your life, in your career, you felt that this book was necessary, and what was the trigger? Obviously, the title itself is giving it away in the sense that colonial discourse and the suffering of whoever let that be. So there is a problem with the colonial discourse. At what point in time, and this is something that all of us have been reading, even if one has not realized, we have been reading in the last 20, 25 years that there is an issue with the colonial discourse. So that much is a given. But at some point in time, you must have felt it really very strongly that this was an issue and this particular book has to be written. I would like to know about that, and then we'll jump into the book.
Thank you, IIWC, for allowing me to come here and talk about this book. Thank you for your introduction, and thank you, Shivakumarji, for setting the stage. I want to clarify at the outset, we haven't worked out the questions. So I was not expecting that I'm going to be greeted with this question. One thing is certainly beautiful, which Shivakumarji said, that we are going to keep it very light. And even if we are talking about dense stiff stuff. We'll keep it light. You know, that's how it's going to be. We are going to make it as conversational as possible. So, returning to your question, Shivakumarji, I would say that this book has found me, rather than me writing the book. And this is not an exaggeration. I would say that this inspiration of this book has come from the divine. If it were not so, then I would have been an instrument. I would have been the person shepherding it. But I have been shepherded. I have been made an instrument. I have been found by the divine to author it. As it was mentioned in the introduction itself, I'm a devotee of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And Sri Aurobindo has written this marvelous book called The Foundations of Indian Culture, which has been renamed as Renaissance in India and other essays. All of you who have not gone through this book, I would highly recommend it, not because Sri Aurobindo happens to be my guru, but the contents of the book are absolutely marvelous and are very, very important even at this stage and even for the current times. So let me tell you a little bit about the book. This book was written between 1916 and 1920. And it was written in response to a journalist by the name of William Archer, who had completely trashed the Indian tradition. And given that Sri Aurobindo is a yogi, and he himself a practitioner of divine Shakti, he took the opportunity to do a Purpaksha on the book and really explain what the culture is from within. I consider that as a sheer grace of the divine because that allowed the foundations for me. I had a complete clarity, even before I went to the United States, what the culture was all about, how it came into existence, how our culture has undergone transformation over a period of time. Now, the things that Sri Aurobindo is addressing in that particular book can be referred to as Orientalism under the canopy or cover of postcolonial studies. That's basically what it is. So this is the background, and it so happened in 2015, the Indian American parents in California were fighting the textbook battle, where they were contesting wrong representations on India and Hinduism. There's a gentleman in the San Francisco Bay Area who contacted me and asked me if I would be able to help him out. He also heads an organization by the name of Hindu Education Foundation. And Hindu Education Foundation, interestingly, was working with another foundation called Hindu American Foundation. And then there were some other academics also who were involved in this project. So when I was invited to participate in this, I looked at the contents of the children's textbooks. And when I did my survey, I could very clearly see that the tropes were Orientalist in nature. They were colonial in nature. And this background that I spoke about, that came to me from Sri Aurobindo, helped me identify that very clearly. And by then, I also had teaching cultural psychology as experience under my belt. So that also gave me the clarity of finding out what the discourse was actually about, or the discourse was on. Now, when I started interacting with the academics, with this group of academics that these two foundations had put together, I found out that the people over there were contesting the narrative based on evidence. And I said to myself that this approach is not going to work. This approach is not going to work because our scholarship, scholarship on Hinduism in India has been colonized for over a period of about 220, 230 years. And the establishment has created such a body of evidence that it would not be easy for us, or in fact I should say it would be impossible for us to win this battle on evidence. And to tell you very honestly, evidence does not really matter because this production of knowledge has been political right from the very beginning. It was never about evidence, it was never about the pursuit of truth. When this background is so much embedded in the process itself, truth and evidence did not really stand a chance. It was very, very clear to me. So I proposed a different approach. I said, look, this discourse is colonial and Orientalist. Let's start pointing these things out instead of talking about evidence. We can talk about evidence, I'm not opposed to evidence, but let's state very clearly what this discourse is all about. It was a motley crowd. There were a lot of people who did not have an Indian background. So my ideas were not that well received. Anyways, when you are part of a group, you participate in the play. I participated, but I knew what the outcome was going to be. To cut the long story short, the framework or the syllabus which was getting revised by the California State Board of Education did not undergo any significant change, even after the closure of the process. So what I did was that I wrote a letter to the State Board of Education. All these pieces of information must be new to you, Shivakumar ji. And thank you so very much, for bringing this out. And I believe, the Divine Mother wants the world to know how I came to writing this book. So I'm incredibly thankful to you. So what I did was that I wrote a letter to the State Board of Education, told them that, look, there are so many lines, so many words in the description of India and Hinduism in your syllabus, and your 85% of the discourse, or rather anywhere from 80 to 85% of the discourse, revolves around this equation called Hinduism equals caste equals hierarchy equals oppression. I provided them the evidence. And then I wrote that, look, when you undertake a discourse like this, or when you represent a discourse like this, you are violating the sacrosanct education codes that have come to you from your constitution. And I enumerated those codes as well. And I showed to them how the codes were getting violated. And there was a bit of writing in between the lines towards the end, which said that if you do not take care of this problem, there's a lawsuit hanging around. And that could be very damaging. But that was not explicit. It was written in between the lines. So I wrote this letter, sent it to the State Board of Education, and I handed this over to this gentleman that I spoke about at the beginning of this conversation. His name is Sanjay Tripathi. My father was not keeping well, and I needed to come to India to take care of him. I handed over the letter. I came here, and I was here for about five and a half months taking care of my father. Now, in the meantime, I was conversing with both Sanjay Tripathi and another gentleman by the name of Krishna Maheshwari. There were two very significant things happened. One was that the divine worked, and this process of syllabus revision, which had been closed, was reopened. And the text of the framework was changed. So when you look at the syllabus now, or when you look at the framework now, you'll find a 50% reduction in the earlier discourse, which hovered around Hinduism equals caste, equals hierarchy, equals oppression. So by the grace of the divine, I would say that this was a major accomplishment on our part. And I say because there were a lot of people involved. You know, this particular approach made an impact, but it is also true that there were many Indian American children who went to the capital of California to depose against the textbook materials. There were many Indian American parents who also made a lot of effort. So it was a collective effort. The Divine Mother handed me something very significant, which I used. And as I said, I used it and went away. Now, let me talk about another gentleman by the name of Krishna Maheshwari. So the process of textbook revision is that once the syllabus or the framework has been created by the State Board of Education, it is handed over to publishers, various and there are many publishers, involved in the process. And based on that framework, the publishers write textbooks. So what Krishna did was that when the draft textbooks of one publisher was released, he critically examined it. And the textbooks also have to be vetted by the State Board of Education. What State Board of Education does is that it creates various committees to look at the textbooks that have been created by them based on the framework that has been shared with them. So, the critique of Krishna Maheshwari was so damning and damaging that 2 draft textbooks of HMH got rejected. And that, Shivakumarji, sent tremors in the publishing world. HMH stocks went down by 14%. In a certain sense, you can say that we did an unalterable damage to HMH. Not that we wanted to do it, but that's how it happened. Because before that, we were appealing to them. We were appealing to all the publishers to involve us in the process so that they could write proper textbooks. So when this happened, HMH became very open to working with us. And by then, Krishna and I had joined hands. Krishna has an organization called Hindupedia, and he asked me to come and join him in the effort. And and it was announced that I'm a senior fellow with Hindupedia, so I work with and for Hindupedia. So we started conversations with the HMH people. And this is from where the divine guidance started, and that's why I'm saying that this book has actually found me. The History of British India of James Mill was lying on my bookshelf for a very long period of time. I had not gone through it, So I don't know what inspiration came to me. I picked up the book and started going through it. And in this particular book, there are 7 chapters on Hindus that are extremely damaging. Extremely damaging, because it was James Mill who has laid the foundations of this equation that I spoke about. Hinduism equals caste, equals hierarchy, equals oppression. He is the one. And he has done this in the overarching umbrella of describing the Hindu people as savage and uncivilized since antiquity. So, when I went through this, I said to Krishna, look, we have hit a gold mine. So, let's ask the HMH people to go through the contents of this book, that is James Mill's History of British India, so that they engage with us properly and engage with us as scholars. We are not activists, We are not, it's not empty activism. We are contesting this because there is misrepresentation. There is a deep problem of untruth, which is affecting the Indian American children very badly. And what happens is that once they get exposed to this kind of material, 6th grade onwards, they start feeling a lot of shame and inferiority complex. And over a period of time, they start disconnecting from their parents, and eventually they disconnect from their ancestors and India. That is what happens. It's a very incremental and gradual process. And many of the children who had gone to Sacramento, which is the capital of California, stated this. They mentioned it very clearly. In fact, in this book, in the last chapter, we have taken some of their testimonies for our analysis, and we have quoted them verbatim with respect to what they are saying. So fortunately, there was one vice president of HMH who was very open to this idea, and she started having her team engage with us. It was at that moment that I basically struck upon the idea of writing a book. And before that, based on what I had figured out as far as the problems in the textbooks are concerned, Krishna and I had jointly authored a book called Making Children Hindu-Phobic. That had already been accomplished. It was published by Infinity Foundation. It is available. I'll share the PDF of that book with all of you. I will send it to Pradyumna. Shivakumar will have more questions, but this was not the only thing. There were many other things that happened in the process of writing this book when one layer led to the opening up of another layer. And that is why I am not being humble when I say that I have not written this book. This book has actually found me. It has come from somewhere else. I am just the nimitta.
Thank you so much, Kundanji. As you said, in the last 2 days of our discussions, last few days, we didn't touch this, so this was new to me as well. But then, see, we have discussed a lot about, James Mill. There is hardly anybody, even in India, who does not know James Mill, in the sense that his historical importance is such that, in some text, somewhere you would come. But we all gloss over it, in the sense that we know that, even I knew that, he has written a history that is deeply demeaning. But beyond that, what was the real flow, downstream flow of the distortions he created was not very evident, or we knew it very superficially. I think that gap this book definitely fills. Before we come into how the distortion created by James Mill affected us, which itself is a book itself, how did you come to the conclusion that he is the man we must deconstruct first? Because this book is probably in the early 19th century. Mill himself became very productive after 1797. And, he died before, of course, by the time of Bentinck and Macaulay. But before that, well before that, you see a lot of Protestant literature on India in the 18th century, significant amount of that. Of course, Sir William Jones had started Asiatic Society in 1784, and he threw up Ashoka and all those narratives about India. And it is through him that Buddhism, cleaving it away into a separate religion, also kind of roots had started. And several others wrote in the 18th century, which we can roughly consider as distortion. Yet, the man of the moment, James Mill, seems to be the numero uno, as you describe, of distortion in terms of its civilizational impact on India. Why and how did you come to that conclusion, as against the body of knowledge that existed in the 18th century before the advent of James Mill?
That's another wonderful question, Shivakumarji. It allows me to talk about the format of the book. So, this book has 6 chapters, and in the first chapter itself, I'm talking very briefly about what postcolonialism is, what postcolonialism does. What is the impact of postcolonialism? What is the end point of postcolonialism, and so on and so forth. I will not go into too many details. The conversation, instead of remaining light, will become stiff. I don't want that to happen. Now, within that context, I picked up 3 post-colonial thinkers who originally wrote in French. And that is why in the title you have Francophone post-colonial thinkers. Their names are Aimé Césaire, Frantz Fanon, and Albert Memmi. Both Césaire and Fanon have a West Indian connection, whereas Memmi is a Tunisian Jew. Now, the commonality amongst these three is that their entire discourse revolves around this colonizer-colonized dialectic. Let me take out dialectic from the picture and say that their entire discourse revolves around a reciprocal relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. Very briefly, what they say is that the colonizer concocts a discourse on the colonized in order to show them uncivilized, uncouth, barbaric, savage, and so on and so forth. And this is something which has happened around the world. You know, all the non-European cultures have suffered the same fate as we have. So, the second chapter of this book actually talks about, you know, their concerns, their academic contentions. And within that framework, James Mill fits very nicely, you know, because as I mentioned earlier, James Mill's agenda was to show us uncivilized and uncouth. So the first 3 chapters of my book were complete. Once again, I do not know from where the inspiration came. Well, I do know from where the inspiration came, but but for the sake of the conversation, I thought that I should read more on James Mill, who he was, what kind of individual he was. So I came across a biography on James Mill, which was published in 1882 by an individual by the name Alexander Bain. Alexander Bain, interestingly, was friends with James Mill's son, another illustrious figure, John Stuart Mill. We don't need to go into the details of John Stuart Mill, but this biography is a very detailed one. So as I was going through the biography, there were a few things that came into the picture, and I want to share them with you. James Mill was born in Scotland in 1773. His parents had shoemaking and shoe selling business. However, James Mill's mother had an aristocratic background. And because of certain political developments, her family had lost aristocracy and she wanted to regain that aristocracy, and she decided to use James Mill as the instrument. Because of which, she was not interested in James Mill taking up the shoe selling and shoemaking business. She wanted to make James Mill a gentleman, her words. By that, she wanted to make him an aristocrat. James Mill was a precocious child, very good in studies, and his intelligence got recognized by the local aristocrats, and they decided to fund his education. So for his bachelor's and master's in divinity studies, he was sent to the University of Edinburgh, where he completed his studies in 1797. It so happened that he was not able to find a job as a preacher, and he struggled for the next 5 years. In 1802, he decided to come to London, which was a city of opportunities back then. Or rather, I should say that it had already become a city of opportunities by then, to try his hand in journalism. So, he became a journalist. He started writing on things. He was working for a periodical which allowed him to man the India desk, which meant that he was writing reviews of all the materials that were coming from India, all the translations that were happening by the East India Company, by the Asiatic Society, and also other materials that were getting produced by ad hoc individuals. What he figured out was that the information on India was very disparate, and that they all needed to be woven into a coherent narrative, which could be used for governance by the East India Company. He was politically astute and he was politically ambitious. And that played a massive role in the creation of the history of British India. And it is true that that there were many people who were writing about various things on India, but their contentions were disparate. They were not together. Different people were writing different things. And he also did not agree with the position that William Jones and his cohort had undertaken. He had another issue, which he wanted to settle. Now, why James Mill and the history of British India? That becomes the question, and it is very important to understand that. The first thing is that it took James Mill 12 years to write the history of British India. See, he damaged us significantly. His effects are still being felt, but we cannot overlook the fact that he put in the work. And he put in a lot of work in those 12 years in writing the history of British India. Now, as luck would have it, as soon as the history of British India got published in 1817, late 1817 actually, he attracted the attention of the East India Company officials. In 1819, he was hired as an official of the East India Company. By the time it was 1823, he was second in command of the hierarchy of the East India Company officials working from the headquarters of the East India Company in London. 1823, you would want to remember that date. East India Company then had 4 departments, and James Mill was overlooking the revenue department, 1823 onwards. In 1830, James Mill became the chief at India House, which was the headquarters of the East India Company in London. So in a certain sense, James Mill became the CEO of the East India Company. And why do I say that he became the CEO of the East India Company? Above him, you only had a board of directors which was presided by a British parliamentarian. That was the hierarchy. Now, just imagine the kind of influence that the history of British India has wielded on India. And there are many kinds of influences that have to be taken into account. And that is why Shivakumar ji, he exceeds all the British writers in terms of a narrative on India. The first consequence. The first consequence was that the history of British India became a required reading at Haileybury College, where the East India Company officials would get trained before coming to serve in India. So these people, after the publication of the history of British India, already came tutored that the Indian people, the Hindu people, were thoroughly uncivilized and savage. And we all know, what civilized people need to do with savages. So a massive oppression was unleashed on the Indian people after the publication of this book. And I'm not the one who's making this claim. There's a author by the name of Bruce Mudlish. And Bruce Mudlish says that it was the oppression of the East India Company officials post the publication of the history of British India, which caused the 1857 revolt. So this is quite massive. There are other consequences as well, and we need to get into those. James Mill, as I mentioned earlier, was a political figure. So in 1825, with some other friends of his, they put together University of London. So all the writings that James Mill was doing for India, as well as for the British social and political context, began to become academically institutionalized. Now, if you start looking at the publications from Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press that came subsequent to the publication of the history of British India by James Mill, you will find that the same paradigm that James Mill had created getting reflected in those books also. So, this framework, this narrative, this paradigm got institutionalized. It became part of the British educational system first, and then with Wood's dispatch, since 1852, began to become a part of the Indian educational system. So you had the Britishers and the colonized Indians, both the categories of people, getting raised on the materials that were written by James Mill. And it is basically because of this, it's because of this institutionalization of this discourse that his discourse has actually not been deconstructed so far. And, and here, I will not be falsely humble. I incidentally happen to be the first individual to be doing this. It's shameful, that after that so many years have passed since 1947, that it is now that someone like me had to attempt this. It should have happened long time ago. And as a closing remark, to your question, Shivakumar ji, you will find the reflections of James Mill on Macaulay's minutes as well. So in a certain sense, while I was having this meta retreat organized by INDICA and Shivakumar ji, and an individual by the name of Arun remarked कि Macaulay का भी कोई बाप हुआ करता था. It is true. Macaulay's Bap was James Mill. You know, we talk about Macaulay's children and we talk about Macaulay, but nobody has actually explored the connection between Macaulay and James Mill. Maybe, you know, that will be you know, the part of my next project, because I do not want to talk about anything which has not been academically published and fully exposed. You know, so I know that the reflections are there. I have not written anything on it, but that material should be produced in academia, and by the grace of the divine, I should be doing it. So, Shivakumar, I had to give you a very long answer to this wonderful question. It is for these reasons that James Mill becomes so important. And I would like to add another thing. You know, James Mill had a mentor by the name of Jeremy Bentham, who is considered the father of utilitarianism. And of course, you know, he had an illustrious son, John Stuart Mill. What happened was that his popularity got sandwiched between these two giants. This obfuscation has had profound consequences for us, because the individual who's the numero uno of the distorter of our discourse completely disappeared from the scene. You know, nobody knows about James Mill. There are not too many academic works that are available on James Mill. So that was another problem, you know, that happened. So he was hiding. So he had to be pulled out from his grave and exhumed. You know, he's not been exposed, he has been exhumed. So
Dhanyavad, Kundanji. Good metaphor. It's been exhumed. See, in my own mind, a critical gap, a critical lack of clarity got fixed in this last few days of discussion. That's about, you know, why did our ancestors, why could they not deal with distortions created by the colonials at that very time itself? Because we had the intellectual muscle power, scholarship muscle power to deal with it. And we constantly did. It's not that our people, Tilak has protested and, you know, countered so many things. Especially in Mysore, you know, we are lucky enough because we did not have a direct colonial administration, due to which our scholars have responded to colonial narratives very strongly. So I would wonder why James Mill was not countered. But now a painful realization is that it is his direct collaboration with the colonial political power that gave scale and protection to his narrative. And that is point number one that I conclude. So you should clarify whether it is correct or not. Point number two that I conclude is his influence. If it were only on scholars, our people may have dealt with it. But it came indirectly through the British administrators. And it was not evident to people what was influencing them. Hence, a brutal colonial power being influenced from a source that was not visible to our people is how we were not able to deal with James Mill. Is it reasonable to make this conclusion?
yeah, you know, James Mill died in 1836. And then in 1840, the fourth volume of the history of British India was commissioned by the East India Company, which was written by a gentleman by the name of H.H. Wilson. And H.H. Wilson, interestingly, served in India, and he belonged to the camp of William Jones. Now, if you will go through the volumes edited by H.H. Wilson on James Mill's History of British India, you will find that all his central narratives have been completely trashed. You know, what I have done is that I have used those footnotes as footnotes in my book as well. So if you will bring all those contestations into account, you will find that the thesis, or rather the central thesis of James Mill, completely collapses under the treatment of H.H. Wilson. But that was the power, you know, of the East India Company. H.H. Wilson, who had already become the occupant of the Borden chair at Oxford University, could not really obliterate the writings of James Mill. But what I believe is that James Mill, the individual, became nondescript, and his paradigm became paramount. So his paradigm ran, whereas the person behind the paradigm became invisible. It's almost like, you know, River Saraswati went underground.
Because the colonial power found it very useful to internalize
Exactly.
and make Mill invisible.
Exactly. And that is why, you know, in 1920 or so, when you find Sri Aurobindo writing the foundations of Indian culture, he is refuting the Millian discourse.
But he's not quoting well.
But, you know, he is not, because he is taking on William Archer. I do not know whether even William Archer knew back then that he was regurgitating or reflecting the discourse of James Mill. That is, you know, that is the power of the institutionalization of the discourse of James Mill. And I think it happened because James Mill wielded that kind of power in East India Company. I would come back to this over and over again, you know. James Mill was the CEO of the East India Company for 6 years, and he oversaw a very important department of the East India Company since 1823. So I think that's, you know, that is the reason. That's the reason. It's the paradigm became important, but the paradigm maker just became invisible, and that's why, you know, it has not come to the surface. Or it is quite possible that they made him invisible, because see what I have done. How is it that I have exposed James Mill? And once again, you know, this was a complete divine grace. I started looking into James Mill's writings for the socio-political transformation that he was seeking for Britain. And what I found out in the process was that he has engaged in complete imagination and projection. I'm not making it up. You know, will it be okay if I shed some light on that?
Yes, please.
So, you know, in order to understand this, we need to understand utilitarian movement and the utilitarian movement of Jeremy Bentham per se. So, Jeremy Bentham, as I mentioned earlier, was the mentor of James Mill. So he certainly was older than James Mill. In fact, when they met in 1808, if my memory is correct, Bentham was 60 and James Mill was 35. You know, so there was this 25-year gap in their in their, 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 chronological years, if you will. So in late 1700s, Bentham, who was very much like a sage, got perturbed by the socio-political situation that he was encountering in Britain. What was the situation like? The situation was extremely hierarchical and oppressive, where power was in select hands, comprising of monarchy, aristocracy, and clergy. It was centrally located, I would say, in the hands of the aristocrats. You know, the monarch was not very powerful. There's a historical background to that. You know, there was an uprising that had taken place in 1688, after which the aristocrats had become more powerful than the monarch. And the aristocrats controlled the clergy. And these three categories of people, who were few and far between in number, held power and kept the large masses under their heels, causing oodles of suffering and poverty. That was, you know, that was what Britain was for you. You would want to read, you know, what Britain was like in late 1700s, early 1800s. You know, the situation of Britain was quite pathetic, actually. So, Jeremy Bentham came across a pamphlet at Oxford University, where he was educated, where he came across something which became the axiom of the utilitarian movement, called the greatest good for the greatest number. The interesting part is that this is a direct translation of something that you find in the Rig Veda, which is Bahujan Hitay, Bahujan Sukhay. How this traveled, you know, to Europe is something that we need to find out. Of course, you know, the Europeans were already in India. They were translating our text left, right, and center. It is quite possible that someone came across this, translated it, put it together in a pamphlet, and that pamphlet landed in the hands of Jeremy Bentham. But Jeremy Bentham picked this up and made the defining feature of the writings that he produced for the socio-political conditions of Britain. Now, interestingly, his ideas, his writings were difficult to follow. As I mentioned earlier, he was very sage-like and philosophical in orientation. So my understanding is that if it were for Jeremy Bentham alone, not much would have happened. James Mill made a huge contribution. What did James Mill do after he came in contact with Bentham? He started simplifying the Benthamite ideas and disseminating them amongst the masses. And in the process, he has written profusely on these three classes of people: English clergy, aristocrats, and monarch. Extensive writing that you find from James Mill. These writings had a profound impact in the sense that British Parliament underwent a reform in 1832 where representational democracy was introduced in the system for the first time. Representational democracy is as new as 1832 in the European context. You know, this is something which we do not know. We think that, you know, Europe has been following democracy since antiquity.
Yeah, that's another thing that our Indian textbooks say, that Magna Carta
Right.
is almost equal to modern democracy. which it
Right.
is not. In any case, we'll come
Right.
back to that.
So, so what happened was that when I started going through his socio-political writings for Britain, I found a massive correspondence between what he was writing for India and what he was writing for Britain. So what he has done is, and chapter 4 of my book goes into great details with this. So I would request you to read the book. And I'm here neither to promote my book nor my ideas, because as I said earlier, the book is open access. It is free to download. And we have made it possible to become available for free, because we did not want its readership to get restricted. So if you read the book, no monetary value is going to come to me, so I'm not promoting my book. I'm requesting you all to spend some time with the contents of the book, because the book has been written for a very different reason. The book has been written to transform India and Hinduism studies across the world, not only in India or United States, but but at other places also. So when I started comparing, his two sets of writings, what I found was that when James Mill was talking about the Hindu Brahmins, he was actually talking about English clergy. I have shown this in great detail in chapter 4. So please read this. It is not my imagination. I'm not concocting it. When he was talking about the Hindu Kshatriyas, he was talking about the British aristocrats. And when he was talking about, the Indian ruler or the Indian king, he was actually talking about British monarch. So, on the surface, on the cover, you find Hindu nomenclature, but the contents are completely British. And the problem is that this very discourse has become institutionalized. The categories of people that I spoke about are being represented in those very terms as we speak. That is the power of his narrative, and that is the power of his discourse. He has not only influenced our academia, he is influencing our politics right now as we speak. And that's why James Mill becomes extremely important. Extremely, extremely important. So with folded hands, I say, please read this book as it is. I don't claim any ownership of this book. I told you in all humility how this book came to me. Maybe there's a higher purpose which is behind this book. There's a higher power behind this book. And that is what I want to bring to you.
Dhanyavad, Kundan ji, for that elaborate answer. In fact, my next question is already answered. That is the nature of the distortion that James Mill introduced. So as you described, the correlation between his description or the reality of clergymen in Britain and his description of Brahmanas, the correlation between the reality of aristocrats and his description of Kshatriyas, and similarly that of between the monarch and the king, and then the governance over there and the governance in India. So it's an interesting distortion where, he wants to transform certain realities of his own country, his own culture, but he blames them on a culture and a geography to which he has not even stepped into. So our audience needs to know this, that James Mill never came to India. All his writing, his entire tenure of East India Company was right in England itself, right, Professor? Only his son, John Stuart Mill, came to, even he did not come to India. Even his stint was right in England. So both the father and the son did not come, but both the father and the son have had a profound negative impact. And Stuart Mill someday, somebody else will deconstruct.
And both of them, interestingly, while they were talking about emancipation and liberty, recommended authoritarian rule for India and Indians.
Exactly. So
Documented. This is documented.
So this you're also a scholar of psychology and Indian psychology in particular. How do you describe this mindset? What compels a scholar and an ambitious, aspiring aristocrat to do this, to do something, you think some X is bad in your country and you want to change X, but you describe another culture that you have not even seen as X. Where does this psychology come from? Apart from the fact that the British East India wanted to use this narrative, it just simply cannot come from, just as a utilitarian output is very difficult to imagine. There must be some deeper motive, some deeper psychological, psychocultural process going on within that must propel itself into this kind of a Rakshasa narrative. How do we come to terms with it? How do we understand this?
See, there's a reason why he's a devotee of Ma Saraswati. He's pulling things out from me, which is absolutely fascinating. So, when you delve into psychological literature, what is it that you find? Amongst many things, you find that people who are not looking within tend to project their own shadows onto others. We say they project their own unresolved issues onto others, our own darkness onto others. It's something like this, that that I am doing something, and then I say to Shivakumar ji, no, you are the one who's doing it, you are the one who's doing it. The fact of the matter is that it's me who's doing it, but because my gaze is not internal, I'm not looking within, I'm not able to catch it. And this is a problem with a lot of people. In our land, this problem will be reduced. I'll tell you the reason why. Because when you start engaging in yogic practices, there comes a point in time where you have to look within. You have to explore your inner universe. If you do not explore your inner universe, your progress in the yogic world would get massively restricted. And from the perspective of Vedanta, there is something that is known as adhyasa. You project a snake onto a rope. You see a rope and you think it is a snake. So because of his unresolved issues, Shivakumar ji, he created a snake out of a rope. And that snake, incidentally, is biting us at various places, It has become a multi-hydra snake, and it keeps biting us all the time. So this is basically what has happened. It is and the Western civilization, and I'm not saying this as a criticism of the Western civilization, I've studied civilizational discourse for a very long period of time, and I understand, the differences amongst civilizations. It is not a civilization which, on a gross scale, allows you to introspect within, go within, that if at all it has that knowledge, it is with a few people, and it is an imported form of knowledge, which is traveling from India to the Western world. So the gauge is always on the outside. The gauge is not within. And because the gauge is not within, the possibilities of projections are extremely high. Because of which, also, James Mill projected.
This not only explains James Mill, this also explains a lot of atrocity literature created on India, and which continues to get created on India even today. When a lot of Western commentators, which tend to do gutter inspection, as Gandhi rightly explains, but they tend to explain it in a very exaggerated manner, both in terms of the physical nature and its consequences. Whereas they would be ignoring realities, beneath their feet in their own respective places. And I think, this is an important point, not to, kind of blame, but to understand and not get caught within fake narratives created by others, because now it was one James Mill who was influencing administrators, and we understand the consequences of that. Today, it is through media. The same James Milling is happening. At least at that point in time, we suffered brutal British administrators who were influenced by James Mill. But now this James Milling is happening through media, right into the minds of every single individual, every day. I think, understanding this paradigm and the sources of this paradigm will help us deal with what's happening today. This James Milling has not ended. It has only increased. And that from that standpoint, this book will be a significant contribution for us to not just understand James Mill and the historical, emergence of all this, but how to deal with today, how to deal with all this today. Because it's never going to end. Civilizational features are not going to end that very soon. I think from that standpoint, this is very important. So I think one point that I wanted to make, you already made, that is this distortion is happening at multiple level, in the description of the governance, in the description of the society. What was not a strict hierarchy being described as a strict hierarchy, with the dynamic of the society taken away. Now we have become a mirror image of that image that was thrust on us. But how do we understand this? How is it that, a civilization tells you are not X and you are Y, and over a period of time, we come to embrace it and accept it, and then not even have that questioning ability to see whether this is correct or not? Is this, which Balagangadhara calls as colonial consciousness? What factors contribute to we internalizing this colonial consciousness so deeply that even when you present evidences like you experienced in the US, and even when you present, just by presenting James Mill and this deconstruction, there will still be a large section of the society which will not understand this, I'm not even talking about the common man, I'm talking about absolute university scholars and absolute, intellectuals who will refuse to accept it. Dealing with it is subsequent, the next thing. But how do we understand that? What captures men and women so strong?
Once again, lovely question, Shivakumarji. See, I have an axiom, and my axiom is that India will be decolonized following the same procedure in which it was colonized. Which basically means that India was colonized through discourse, India will be decolonized through discourse. I'm a firm believer in this. I believe that if sufficient number of people will get interested in this pursuit, not for politics, not for pursuit of power, but for sheer pursuit of truth and evidence and knowledge, this will start changing over a period of time. My appeal to all of you is to help create an ecosystem where we create scholars and scholarship. It will do the trick. You know, if we look at India historically, the fact that, or Bharat, let me say Bharat, if Bharat has been a great nation over a period of time, it is through the dint of scholarship. Everything else was ancillary. We produced and produced voluminously. Where have the scholars gone? You know? Why is it just one Kundan Singh writing on something like this? There should be so many others. So many people joining hands, interacting with one another, and creating a momentum. So I would say, and this is an appeal to all the people who are here and people who are listening to us through other media, that create an ecosystem, you know, where such pieces of work can happen. And it should be inspired by just one thing: pursuit of knowledge and truth, and the pursuit of divinity. If it is appended with our yogic pursuits, things will change. I am a firm believer in this. There is no other thing that will change this. If James Mill is in our universities today, there will come a time when an alternative or the true discourse will be in our universities. It has to happen. If James Mill could do it, we can do it very well. You know.
Thank you, Kundanji. I think that brings me to the next most important aspect of your book. In this book, you not only deconstruct Mill, you not only establish the context in which Mill is operating, you've elevated it to the civilizational reasons why a James Mill gets created and why a James Mill is not going to happen in India. Because we are not interested in neither are we interested in distorting our own realities, nor are we interested in misrepresenting other civilizations. But a James Mill, not one, but many, will continue to be created, and you have, traced it back to the cultural dimensions of the Western civilization, where they operate in binaries, where good, bad, right, wrong, body, soul, and the separation of of the two. There is a constant urge in the Western mind to create an X and a Y, where X is not the same as Y, and there is a constant clash between X and Y. at a superficial level. But both X and Y are created by the same cultural process of the Western civilization. Whereas in India, iha para, we always seek an integration. We always seek an integration between every binary. Asuras and Devatas have the same common father, Rishi Kashyapa. So there is a transcending of binary. I think that is one of the biggest contributions of this book, that it is not just describing James Mill and the history, but it has transformed a historical analysis and discourse into a philosophical analysis and discourse. So, a question that I have is that, is a deeper understanding of this philosophical dimension, or what we call as cosmological dimension, the tattvic dimension of our civilization, and understanding how we transcend binaries and why they cannot transcend binaries. Will this help us in the decolonizing process?
Once again, beautiful, Shivakumarji. It will. And I firmly believe in this. See, as we start this process of decolonization, it is extremely important to understand our darshana systems. How have the darshana systems come about? They have come about through sheer pursuit of truth and knowledge. They are legitimate pursuits of knowledge, They are absolutely legitimate pursuits of knowledge. Just like Western pursuits of knowledge are legitimate in their own right. All these systems have elaborate epistemologies. What do I mean by, it's a big word, what do I mean by epistemology? Epistemology basically means theory of knowledge. How do you know what you know? That's basically what epistemology is in very simple terms. I'll repeat. How do you know what you know? So all these systems of thought, all our darshana systems describe how you know what you know. If I am a student of Sri Aurobindo's darshana system, Sri Aurobindo has also explained how he came to this knowledge elaborately. He is very detailed in that description. Vedanta carries that epistemology. It discusses that epistemology in detail. Buddhism does it. Jainism does it. So the first thing is, we all have our own gurus. We have all have our paramparas. We all have our traditions. Great. Fabulous. I'll give you an example. Just because we love our parents, we don't start striking the parents of others. We don't start striking the parents of our friends. When we go to meet them, we still touch their feet just the way we touch the feet of our parents, right? So what I mean to say is that we could be following our own paramparas and traditions to the hilt, but we could be very respectful to other paramparas and traditions that are in existence in India. We could study them as well with equal reverence, while being firmly situated within one's own parampara. It is very much possible. It happened 2 days ago. Shivakumarji, I am a devotee of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, but I am extremely reverential and devoted to Sri Raman Maharshi also. I have studied his literature also. It is possible. So, when we do this, at least what I have found is that there are profound interconnections amongst all these traditions. You know, all of them together, they create a wonderful whole. There's also something very interesting in them, which is that they all are unanimous in one thing: the transcendence of dualities, dichotomies and binaries. द्वंद्व के पार जाने के लिए ये सब बोलते हैं आपको. All of them. All of them talk about, transcending these dualities and dichotomies. And interestingly, they begin the discourse with very simple dichotomies and dualities, like true and false, right and wrong. And that is where they start challenging your mind, your brain. They would say, you think that true is true and false is false. Take out true and see if false exists. The fact of the matter is that if you take out true, false also goes. False also does not exist. If you take out day, night also disappears. Day creates night and night creates day. They are mutually contingent. And understanding this, they say that don't go, after one at the exclusion of others, of the other rather. They are together. प्रतित्व समुत्पाद है दोनों के बीच में. एक की उत्पत्ति दूसरे से होती है. Understanding this, and of course, there are intricate discussions around this particular topic. They say, transcend it. Because if you will transcend this, you will transcend your mind. Mind operates in binaries. And if you go into further details, it is buddhi that operates in binaries. Why do I say buddhi operates in binaries? Buddhi is the discerning principle within us. It gives rise to vivek. How does vivek come about? When you make a distinction, this is right, this is wrong, this is true, this is false, this is adharma, this is dharma, this is ethical, this is unethical, this is moral, this is immoral, and so on and so forth. When you start transcending these dichotomies, you start transcending your buddhi. When you start transcending your buddhi, you start transcending your mind, your antahkaran. I won't go into too many details. Linked with buddhi is your ahankara. Comes from the understanding of Sankhya. Your ego begins to become very supple and humble. You don't have to put up a show of being humble. You are truly, genuinely humble because you have transcended dichotomies and dualities. When you have transcended dichotomies and dualities, and consequently mind, silencing your mind becomes very simple. आँख बंद कीजिए, ध्यान लगाइए, मन शांत, कहीं नहीं जा रहा है, स्थिर. There are planes of existence that have to be experienced. You begin to feel them, you begin to know them. So, this transcendence of dichotomies and dualities is extensive in our tradition. Their descriptions are extensive. This is not there in the Western cosmology, in the Western world. Because of which, the Western world operates in dichotomies and dualities, and there are patterns around which their operations happen. I have captured them in theorems. In our own traditional setup, we will say that they are sutras. Am I the generator of that? Once again, I'm not. I was teaching a class on cultural psychology. You know, when I was discussing certain things, and I told my students that they all can be captured as theorems. Let me go home, write them down, and I will share them with you. At the first stroke, I got 7 theorems. After some more time, I got 2 more. They have become a dozen now. There are 12. 7 of them I have used in this particular book. So, you know, talking about cosmological differences, I'm not talking about the cosmological differences as a nationalist, you know, as a Hindu nationalist, as the wider world would like to call me, you know. I'm not doing that. It has come to me through sheer pursuit of knowledge, through understanding not only, you know, the tradition to which I belong, but also the tradition in which I've been immersed for the last 25 years. And this comparison is for the sake of knowledge. It is also for the sake of humanity, for the transformation of humanity. Not only for the sake of the transformation of India, though the focus is here, because I see the adharma which is being practiced on India through academia and media. And that is something that needs to be transformed, that needs to be changed. And that's why. Shivakumarji.
Thank you. Just to connect it back, I think the binary of civilized and savaged is one such binary in which the West is stuck, which it is not able to transcend. Even though now it keeps talking about, you know, decolonization studies and so many things, it constantly moves from one binary to another binary. At some stage, they made it civilized and savaged. Now they have transformed that into developed countries and developing countries. So it constantly moves, shifts. It seems to absolve itself of a past binary, but conveniently moves into another binary. This brings me to the last question. The last 2 chapters of this book are an impact on the Indian Americans in US. Of course, you've been in India for a long time, and you're there in US also for a long time. So you see the impact of James Mill and his narrative on India and our school system. Just briefly, how is this impact different on Indian American kids in the US? A few pointers on that, and then we'll, you know, hand it over for audience questions.
I don't think it is different. I don't think it is different. You know, I do not know, Shivakumarji, which board you studied in, but I went through the CBSE board. And in all probability, you know, if I look into my books, I have never sold my books, even, you know, when I was studying in the kindergarten. You know, if I go through my collection, I'm pretty much sure that I will be able to find, you know, my NCRD book, which was written by Ramila Thapa. Did I not encounter unconscious inferiority complex? I'm pretty much sure I must have. You know?
That's interesting. It's interesting because, since you asked, I studied in the Karnataka State Board. Thankfully, we were least colonized until around maybe 2000. Of course, now Thapar's narrative has entered as well. And since you're a devotee of Sri Aurobindo, I'm saying, in 10th standard, some people from my generation would know, we had something called a non-detailed, and we had 50 pages of Sri Aurobindo in 10th standard, which I think at least 10 years Karnataka kids studied, whoever took first language. So lakhs and lakhs of kids got to study, which I have seen even in West Bengal, they have not studied Aurobindo to such an extent. But yes, I understand. After that, looking into the CBSE board and the NCERT textbooks, I can now clearly see, how much James Mill had entered into NCERT long back, which for some reason we were lucky to escape, but we are also now part of it. So I can imagine that, the impact is definitely going to be quite similar.
I would slightly disagree with you. I would say that the impact of colonization on the mind, being a psychologist, and I can say this with some conviction, is far more insidious than we recognize.
I agree with you.
Far more insidious. I am able to look into my inferiority. Though I would disagree, I never was this, individual was completely enamored of the West. I was enamored of knowledge, of course, and I vacillated between knowledge coming from India and coming from the West. But I would still say that all of us growing in post-colonial India in certain measures have been affected by colonization, and it would be good to assume that we are colonized and then decolonize rather than think that we are not colonized.
True. Right. That would be another trap.
Another trap. So I would say that, let's play safe and say that we are colonized. I mean, look at this. I'm still colonized. Look at, look at the trouser that I'm wearing. Look at the language that I'm speaking. Am I not colonized? I am.
True. I think, this is something that I keep reflecting upon, that as long as we keep English as the, common link language, certain amount of colonial thought is impossible, to overcome. In any case, that's a long conversation that's part of another book and another journey and another such sitting. Thank you so much. It was a beautiful, engaging exploration, I would say. With this, I would request the audience, if they have any question, to Professor Kundan Singh. Can somebody give a mic there?
Namaste. My name is Vinay Kulkarni. This is a topic that is so close to my heart. It's from my whole life. I felt this kind of oppressive, the attempt to create an inferiority complex through every means possible. And when I really took up reading in 5th grade, and this is where I spent most of my childhood, Indian Institute of World Culture, in this library. There are 40,000 books, and then a few other libraries. In this city center library, which is through the government. They used to get loads of books, they used to come fresh, and we used to, but most of the books were Western, right? The Skinner of the Skinner's Horse, and all these things. And I was very fascinated, and all the quotes there, Milton, the book is a lifeblood of the master spirit. It's still there, over there. I still remember those. And I think the easy access, if you want to read, if you're someone who's interested in reading, whether you went to a private library or a government library, basically it's flooded with these books. But the 5 years of Sanskrit, from 8th grade to 12th, that was the thing that was so mind-blowing. But it didn't impact everyone in my class the same way. But as soon as I came in contact with Sanskrit, I knew there was nothing that could ever come close to any of this. And once I was introduced to those Indian authors and Indian texts, okay? So I still went into the West. I read the entire Russian literature because it was so easily available, right? And also the entire British Waverley novels and the Scottish and all that stuff. It was very fascinating. But the first time I went to London, the whole thing collapsed. It was so disgusting to see London. And I still remember in 12th grade, I was the only, I think about 150 students, when the teacher asked, was British rule great for us or not? Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, I got into this thing.
No, that's okay, please. Yeah, please continue. Yeah.
So I think I was just caught up with this thing you're saying about inferiority complex. I don't know how, I mean, it's there. I definitely recognize I was colonized, but something somehow was floating and stayed afloat until I found the right things. So, you know, the question is, what is the direct mechanism for, I mean, other than the scholarship and book? Because I agree that scholarship is the means to get there. But on the ground, when I work with people, I think it's a long journey. Most people have, some people act like they never knew that we had British ruling us, right? And there's a good mass of people there. So how do we, from the high scholarship, how do we bring it down to the, I mean, that's where I'm trying to work on that level, on the ground level. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. See, the book is an example of this effort. When you'll go into the first 4 chapters, the discussions are fairly stiff. But what is the end point of all this? It is talking about changing the discourse at the 6th grade level. That is where the book is ending, right? So, I feel that we need to start, you know, with children, catch them young. It is not, you know, about the language per se. Of course, language is a tool, you know, of colonization also. But it is about the content. I would say that to a large extent, my generation, our generation, was also saved by Amar Chitra Katha. You know, I do not know whether Uncle Pai is alive or not. You know, all of us, we should gather together and pay homage to that individual because he actually saved us. You know. So, things have to be done at many different levels. One individual, we do not even know what his story was, you know. We do not even know whether he wrote about his background. But he impacted us deeply. The intervention has to be made at many different levels. It has to be made at the early level, you know, at the middle school level, high school level, and of course, the university level. Taking it to where we do such kind of research that we once again become world leaders. And I'm not exaggerating. We have been there. We have created such kinds of discourse. We can still do it. You know, if we are excelling in technology at this point in time, we can excel in social sciences as well. It's a matter of putting our heart and soul into it and creating an ecosystem. But the intervention has to be at many different levels. It is always the content. What is it that you are teaching the kids? What is it that you are getting exposed to? And I feel that, you know, this current generation is going to ask many questions with regards to our tradition, with regards to our culture. Why should we do this? Why should we that why should we not do it, and so on and so forth. You know, even as our cosmology transcends reason, it also includes reason. It is very logical. This trans-logical cosmology of ours is very logical as well. There's a reason for everything. The reason comes from Shastras. It comes from understanding, you know, the nuances of the Shastras. And from there we can tell the children, if we are saying not this, what is the reason? Not that, you know, I mean, of course, this also works. कि हजारों साल से चीज़ें चली आ रही हैं, यही चलेंगी और 1000 साल. That also works, you know. I'm not opposed to that. But for a lot others, what will work will be explanations, and those explanations can only come if we understand the nuts and bolts on which our culture was built. There are codes to our culture. I'm very cognizant of that, and by the grace of the divine, the writings of Sri Aurobindo helped me understand those codes. You know, I had a very inquisitive mind. I would not have stopped at not finding answer to, you know, the questions that were bothering me. My answers come from Sri Aurobindo. You know, for others, things will come from other places. So that's, you know, my answer to your question.
I think as we see these attempts, at the same time there's a leak happening from the other side. So that's anyway. It's a long conversation. Thank you.
I think we should take a few more questions. If anybody has a question, any other? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. History was not an easy subject while I was studying. And I probably waited until class 10, you know, to not study history anymore. How do we change that mindset to the current generation? And do you have any points on that? Because today, if I read, you know, I've read a lot of Dr. Navratna Ram Rajaram. He happened to be my grandfather's cousin. So, you know, he would, when we were in school, he would just go through our history book and say, this is not the right thing that you're studying. And how do we change that perception about history to the current generation? That would be my question.
Thank you for that question. To answer your question, I will share with you an experience. This is 2024. 2015, I was experimenting with a university in India to return from the United States. I won't take the name of the university. The general perception within the faculty over there was that the students are not interested in studying. And the conviction that I had was that they would study if we know the right methods to teach them. And as I was having this conversation, I was thrown to teach one particular class, history. And I'd heard that the class was notorious. So I went there. I will not take the name of the city, you know, for obvious reasons. But this is what I did. I said, well, you know, your city has history. And it has a very interesting history. And if you will know the history of this city, you will be able to do a lot of things that will change things for you in the present. I started teaching them history by going into the history of their city. I did not encounter rowdy students. You know, I personally feel that the way to teach is to generate curiosity amongst the students. If you will make your subject matter relevant, they will be with you. They will be with you for long hours. They will just hang around, you know. But if we start imposing things, there's a fundamental difference between education and training. You know, in the name of education, what we have started doing is that we train, or we like to train minds. We do not draw things out, you know. अंदर क्या है, उसको बाहर निकाल लो. And that is why, you know, as Shivakumar ji has seen, I was interacting with 12 people. I did not have a slide. I did not have notes. I did not even look into my own book. But for 2 days, we engaged, and we engaged absolutely wonderfully. The only exception was a professor from a renowned university, you know. And I know that that methodology won't work, because my methodology worked with the other 10 people. So, you know, it is about generating curiosity. It is about drawing what is within there, you know. Sri Aurobindo would say that you take your students from where they are to where you want them to be. If you come to a class, you know, where you have to teach, you look down upon people. मैं तुम्हें पढ़ाने के लिए आया हूँ, मैं तुम्हें बताऊंगा कि मैं कितना बड़ा ज्ञानी हूँ, और तुम सब लोग जो है आकर के मेरे चरण स्पर्श करो, उसके बाद वो फेलियर होगा, वो नहीं सक्सीड करेगा. आप उनके अंतरतम में चले जाइए, मामला बदल जाएगा.
Thank you.
So that was a wonderful conversation between the author and Shivakumar. And it's very sad that our Max Muller or Gurukula system of education went off. So all these problems started in our country. And as you rightly said, we have never discriminated any knowledge between West or East or something like that. Rigveda says, Ano Badrakatavo Yantu Vishwataha. And Ekam Sat Vipra Bhoda Vadanti. All the things are there. Indian Institute of World Culture, our motto is that comparative study of religion, science, and that is also there. When we have conducted Western philosophy classes here, people who have attended those classes wanted to know what our system, what our knowledge is there. They used to ask questions relating to the Western philosophy and Indian philosophy. That's also there. But only thing is we have to create an atmosphere that our people, our students have to read our books and all that. So it was a wonderful conversation between you people. I thank you very much, Mr. Kundan Singh, Dr. Kundan Singh, and also Shivakumar. I request Arakli Narayan Venkatesh to hand over the token of gesture to our guests. I thank you all who have presented here, though it was a rainy day, rainy evening. So I thank you very much, and also the people who are seeing on our YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Good night.
I'd like to thank Indian Institute of World Culture. This stage, it's a historical stage, Kundanji. I've been a born brought up Bangalorean, and on this stage, I have seen umpteen number of programs of stalwarts, of freshmen, of all cultural spectrum. This stage has seen thought flowing. You know, it akin to river Ganga and river Saraswati of a certain kind. Just to be here was always a privilege, cultural privilege. And to be on the stage and discussing coloniality and decoloniality and how we must civilizationally move forward is a great blessing. I thank Indian Institute of World Culture for the opportunity.
Thank you.